Welcome, everyone. My name is Uwe Brandes. I'm the Executive Director of the Urban and Regional Planning Program here at Georgetown. And it is my distinct pleasure to welcome you to what is our second of a series of discussions and dialogues this spring. And we've themed them around the concept of the city disrupted. So to provide a little bit of background on that, last fall, we had a discussion series focused on planning big investments in cities. These were investments that occur over 10, 20, 30 years that take long time to implement with enormous amounts of capital involved. And so we're pivoting and looking this spring at changes in cities that are a bit more ephemeral, a bit quicker, that happen on a much shorter time frame. Several of these are related to the broader revolution that we find ourselves in with respect to information technology, but we'll move on later in the semester into changes in governance, changes in industries within cities. It is really exciting tonight to be able to host a discussion that we've entitled Sleeping in Cities with Ease. The impact of the sharing economy on lodging and space. And this is a great opportunity to talk about and to really partner with one of our fellow programs here at Georgetown with the hospitality program, and you'll hear from Gregg in just a minute. What I'd like to do is just very, very quickly introduce our speakers, and you'll hear a more thorough self-introduction from each of them in a minute. But we're really delighted to have Troy Flanagan here with us tonight. Troy's the Vice President of State and Local Government Affairs for the American Hotel and Lodging Association. We have Ellen McCarthy with us here tonight. The planning students in the program are very familiar with Ellen. Ellen serves on the faculty of the program. She's also the former Director of Planning of the District of Columbia. And we also have Nick Pappas here with us tonight. Nick is the Director of Public Affairs for Airbnb. Nick's also a former Assistant Press Secretary for the Office of Health Reform in the White House. And so we're very delighted and appreciative of you joining us here tonight. And without further ado, Gregg has a few comments as well.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Gregg Sheely, the Executive Director for the Masters in Hospitality Management program here at Georgetown. Tonight is going to be a bit more of a casual conversation. I know it looks a bit formal here with all these chairs facing you, but what we want to encourage you to do is to ask questions. We have some questions that we have pre-planned, and we want to really incite some discussion, not only with each other, but also with all of you. After we finish, in about an hour, we have a reception upstairs, so you're all invited to come take part in that on the little overlook on level 2. But before that, I want to ask a couple of questions for the audience, just to kind of start this engagement. How many of you have booked a hotel room online? Very good. How many have booked a summer rental, maybe a villa or a house or something like that? Quite a number of you. How many have booked an Uber and an Airbnb? So you can see there's significant impact in the audience in terms of these new vehicles that we're talking about today. And so tonight represents a really interesting partnership, I believe, between the Hospitality Management Program and the Urban and Regional Planning Program. There's a lot of intersection between these two groups, especially when it comes to development. And so tonight, we want to talk about two things in particular. We believe everybody knows the players here to some extent. So we want to go a little bit deeper. We want to talk about placemaking, and we want to talk about market making. And so that's where we want to direct the conversation tonight. And part of our assumption is that audiences have changed, and people are looking for authentic experiences and local experiences. And that might give reason why some of these new modules and modalities within the sharing economy are taking everybody by storm. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit more about that. And without further ado, I'd love for each of the individual panelists to introduce yourselves on a little deeper level and tell us more about what you do on a day-to-day basis. Thank you.
Sure, I'll start. Troy Flanagan with the American Hotel and Lodging Association, as was already said. I'm part of our government relations, government affairs team, so the lobbying side of the association. I particularly focus on state and local government. I think you'll see a lot of trade associations in DC. Some more recently than others are recognizing that a lot of national issues, whether it be workforce issues like wages or taxes or healthcare, are not just happening. The debate isn't just happening at the federal level, and often when the gridlock of Congress comes into play, the actual action is happening at the state and local level. So the role that I play is working with our state association partners. Just about every state has some type of lodging or hospitality association. I work with them on a daily basis to discuss the trends and how national issues are playing out at the state and local level, provide them tools to address those debates in their particular cities and states.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm Ellen McCarthy. I'm an adjunct professor here and also was for several years the director of planning at the DC Office of Planning. Many of my students have heard me in the past quote one of my favorite Daniel Patrick Moynihan statements: urban planners have been tormented by the realization that everything relates to everything. And I think that's very apropos in this instance, number one, because I'm not a hospitality expert per se, but I'm a planner, so Uwe figured, well, you know, she could talk about hospitality. But also because I see a couple different aspects of my past career that relate to actually polar opposite aspects of this discussion. On the one hand, as the planning director and deputy director of planning before that, we were very involved in planning for both the redevelopment of the old convention center and what could we do to make it feasible to build the 1,100 room convention center hotel that accompanied that, and many issues involved with employment and economic development and the hospitality industry, in the formal hospitality industry. On the other hand, I am a past board member of Cultural Tourism DC, CTDC, which is an entity devoted to trying to find ways from heritage trails to walking tours and others to get those tourists off of the mall and to get them into the city's neighborhoods and appreciate the incredible riches that we have out in the neighborhood. And Airbnb, clearly, when you look at their listings in Washington, D.C., is a place that has a number, or is an entity that has a number of places that are located in those very neighborhoods that we want people to have a chance to appreciate and to experience in D.C. So I can see this from both angles.
Well, my name is Nick. I, as was said, spent my time before Airbnb in government and politics. I am neither a hospitality expert nor an urban planner, which means that all of you have forgotten more about hospitality and urban planning than I will ever know. But I have worked for Airbnb for 2 years as part of our communications team, focusing on public affairs. And in that capacity, I've spent a lot of time talking about, thinking about, and communicating about these various issues as they relate to the development and growth of cities and how the sharing economy interacts with communities, both large and small. So great to be with everyone.
Excellent. That's great. So I wanted everyone to start off with kind of like a basic description of customers and customer behavior, and to kind of just reflect on some incredible trends that we see in cities. One of the most profound, I think, is during the financial crisis in New York, the international tourist economy in New York was really incredibly strong. And one of the ways in which the city kind of kept up its employment levels and obviously drove the local economy, and all kinds of quirky things started happening, right? There was this influx of Brazilian tourists into New York City, and it made the headlines for a period of time. But one of the things that's so extraordinary about the internet, of course, is just the reach. So when we think of local markets, traditionally we've thought about different capture areas and thought about, you know, trying to describe markets in discrete ways. And yet now it seems like, you know, the tourism industry has exploded, and you know, we can kind of go to our desks and click and book a room in Shanghai, or go and book a room or a villa in the south of France with such ease that it has exploded this notion of markets for cities. So what has started off in a very traditional, localized way seems to have exploded. And I wonder if you would just reflect on that. What is the marketplace for hospitality these days?
That's a good question. I think the customer base and the market for us is wherever the customer is. So, you know, a hotel that you know, I don't think there are any that do that doesn't have some type of online presence or market itself in ways other than its own website. You know, for instance, Expedia or Priceline, or even see some traditional hotel properties or independent B&Bs use websites like Airbnb and HomeAway as well. So you have to go to where the customer is and meet their needs and make it as easy as possible for them to make that decision to book a trip.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that was obvious as I was reading various articles about hospitality issues in Airbnb is how diverse the segments of the hospitality market are, and how it is cutting into or changing what had been some of our typical perceptions. It came home to me at the Office of Planning at one point when we were approached by a motel operator on New York Avenue. Those of you who are familiar with coming into the city on New York Avenue know it's a pretty interesting.
The classiest places in it.
yeah. I mean, for the time I was a small child, I was fascinated by the one that featured the large the large window of the bedroom of the section of the motel that was perpendicular to the rest of it and came out to the street, and wondering, wow, like, does anybody ever sleep here? And just, you know, open that was before the High Line, so yeah. So when one of those operators approached us and said they wanted to do an addition that would be a second building and they would need to get a variance from their parking requirements, we were pretty skeptical because it's New York Avenue, you know, it's not exactly transit accessible. And they explained, number one, that they needed to do this because that way they could engage two flags. They could have the original hotel still under the hotel management company that they were, and then by building the second edition and branding that separately, they'd have access to two separate computerized reservation systems, because that was so important to their business. And when we said, yeah, but how can we take seriously the fact that you are going to have a smaller number of parking spaces out here, they were explaining that they are the lodging choice of any number of business travelers who come to the city, business travelers that I assumed would be solely the purview of the established hotels in town, but that so many of the people who came were either government employees on a per diem or from nonprofits or educational institutions, SMRFs, I believe you call them, that couldn't afford downtown hotels. And I looked at the HVS report on DC's hospitality section, and of the 120 hotels, only 4 were properties that were mid-scale. So more than 50% of them were upper level hotels. So it made me kind of recalibrate a little bit my thinking about who was the market for more budget-priced lodging. And also, when we were doing research on the convention center, what we had discovered was that a number of the family visitors that we had ended up not staying in the city and going to motels and hotels that were in the surrounding areas that were located close to metro stations. So I realized, well, I might have originally assumed that the growth of Airbnb was costing the city in terms of visitors and hotel tax. In fact, it might be allowing us to have more people, even on the business traveler side, as well as the family tourist casual visitor side, actually may have more people coming into the city than we would have otherwise. So it's an interesting balancing act, and one I think that the city probably needs to do some better research in to understand what is the bottom line in terms of the implications of that.
So a couple of things, just to sort of zoom out a bit. Airbnb, if you don't know the story, got started because there were two guys in San Francisco who couldn't pay their rent. And they realized that there was a major design conference coming to town and all the hotels in San Francisco were sold out. So they thought, what should we do? And they had a couple of air mattresses. So they blew up those air mattresses, put together what now looks very antiquated website, and got a few people to stay in their living room on those air beds, and they called it Air Bed and Breakfast. And a few years later, they shortened the name to Airbnb. That origin story has led many people, and after they did it, they had this amazing time. They had a great connection with the people who stayed at their place. They loved the experience, and they thought, maybe we have an idea here. And it turns out that they did. That origin story has led many people to believe that the Airbnb customer is all a bunch of young kids with no money who are sleeping on couches. And if you are a young kid and have no money and want to sleep on someone's couch, we have options for you. But that is far and away not in the entirety of the Airbnb host base or the Airbnb guest base. We have folks who are old and young, folks budget and luxury. There are a variety of different accommodation choices that are available to people via Airbnb. So to get back to the sort of larger question that you asked about sort of who is the customer is really anyone and everyone. My parents have used Airbnb, friends who are younger, friends who are older have used Airbnb. It really cuts across all sorts of different lines. We now have listings in more than 190 countries. We have more than 1 million listings. And we are in 34,000 cities. So it really accommodates whatever your preference may be, and it allows people to choose what works for them. So be it a luxury accommodation, be it a budget accommodation, it really does provide for anyone who is interested to pick an accommodation option that works for them.
What I find interesting is both of you mentioned the notion of price, and there was an assumption initially about budget. And what I find interesting that you're saying is it's not necessarily about budget at all. It might be something different, which I would love to kind of swing back and ask the question about the notion of local and authenticity in that line. And would that be a connecting factor for the audience? Or is it an accessibility? Is it fatigue of sort of staying in a globalized hotel? What would make them choose the difference between staying in something that they kind of understand the product, understand the brand, versus taking a chance on something that's a little unpredictable?
I think that there are a number of factors, and I think that what it really comes down to is consumer choice. There are some consumers who are going to be more price sensitive than others. There are some consumers who really want to stay in a particular neighborhood that might not be well served by hotels, like the kinds of neighborhoods that you were talking about in DC, that are the focus of the heritage trails and things like that where you don't see big hotels. There are some folks who, as you said, don't want the sort of standard experience, and there are some folks who probably do want the more standardized experience of a hotel who have that option. I think that what it really comes down to is giving people the freedom to choose the accommodation option that works for them, and people are going to evaluate those things differently based on a whole range of different factors. When I am traveling by myself for work purposes, the type of Airbnb listing that I'm looking for is very different than when I'm traveling with my toddler and my wife. We're going after something different, and we may, may sort of have different needs in those cases. the landscape is changing and evolving to give people and make it easier for people to have more choices based on what works for them. That, on balance, I think is a good thing.
Troy, I mean, you have this amazing position where you kind of see the whole lodging industry. And one of the things that I find just amazing is that even within, the kind of tried and true big lodging companies, there's a brand explosion occurring. It just seems like it's, all kinds of different niche markets that are being catered to. Can you reflect a little bit on the kind of format of lodging and trends that you see in the industry, and maybe tie that to cities and customer segments?
Yeah, certainly, and I think a lot of that kind of gets to the demand that's allowing Airbnb and its competitors to be very successful. Is that you have large brands who want to, as I said, please and meet the customer where they want to be. I don't think you're ever going to have a situation where a large chain brand is going to be able to replicate the experience that you're going to get at some of the truly unique Airbnb or properties, and I don't think that they're going for that. We do represent a number of traditional bed and breakfast properties, but we represent everything in between, from the largest of the large to thousands and thousands of independents. We also represent the ownership groups, the management companies, as I said, the state associations. We work with all of those. And I think the distinction, or what you're pointing out, is that some of the larger ones who have the ability to kind of adapt their portfolio are trying to address some of the appeal of different audiences. Not everyone wants to stay in the convention Marriott a couple blocks from here, but they may want to stay at a more unique property, like a Kempton property or something that has a little more character. And so you're seeing more of those types of lifestyle brands. A lot of those are meant to appeal to a younger audience. So that's where a lot of that market is going.
That's great. And can you reflect on, are there trends that you see or that are being documented and researched with respect to places in cities and location? I mean, I think, and it's not a fair example, but it is amazing, and Ellen talked about the enormous amount of effort that went into creating the convention center hotel, and obviously location is the key driver to that project.
Yeah, it's I think the big distinction between a smaller property that wants to be out in the neighborhood or an Airbnb type property is that it's a much bigger capital expense and planning process to undertake the construction of a traditional hotel or even build a new bed and breakfast. And if you go through the legitimate channels, there's a lot of zoning restrictions that our members have to address before they could meet the customer in that neighborhood. So if you went to the city or a neighborhood neighborhood alliance to try to turn a building into a small hotel in, say, Capitol Hill, that's going to be a much longer, more difficult process than simply listing a series of properties. So we do have some barriers with being able to meet the customer in the geographic sense because of the fact that our members have a lot more taxation and regulatory obligations that they have to deal with.
Yeah, in fact, I think the folks who are trying to develop the hotel in Adams Morgan would totally agree with you about the difference in difficulty as they go into their second or third year of trying to get their entitlements.
Ellen, do you want to reflect on community relations and the entitlement process?
The biggest area of controversy that has existed in D.C. with regard to the entitlement process has largely been, there was a period of time in the late 60s, early mid-70s, where a number of apartment buildings, this was a point in time in which the city had gone from 800,000 people in 1950 to 550,000 or so in 2000. We had been losing population every year. So there were a number of owners of apartment buildings who converted those apartment buildings to hotels. And then there was quite a backlash against that and zoning restrictions put into place to prohibit any new hotels in residential areas or even expansion of the commercial components of hotels in residential areas. I suspect that one of the big fights to come is going to be, I realize when I look at most of the literature about Airbnb, there have been issues that the main political battles have been over whether Airbnb hosts are paying hotel taxes. I think for a city like DC, a far more serious issue is that we have 86% of our extremely low income people being severely cost burdened for their housing. We have just a horrendous affordable housing problem in the city. And I notice what I suspect is an interesting trend with Airbnb of going from more of a situation where people were sharing quarters and looking for the extra income or whatever, to now, when I spent some time on the New York site and the DC site, a surprisingly large number of postings indicated entire apartment available or entire unit available. And I believe the New York Attorney General, in coming out very negatively against Airbnb recently, had cited at least 100 instances they had found of hosts that own 10 or more, in some cases substantially more, units. Mm-hmm. So to the extent that one can get $100, $200, $300 or more per night, if that means that people will be removing those units from the housing supply in DC and instead renting them out on a nightly basis, it cannot have positive implications for what's already a serious affordability problem in the city.
So that raises two good issues that we should talk about. The first are taxes and the second is affordable housing. So on taxes, there is a legitimate question as to whether or not renting out your spare bedroom on an occasional basis should qualify you as a hotel and have you subject to hotel taxes. I think that is a debate and a discussion that municipalities and counties and states and some places in the world, countries are going to have over the coming few years. But on the Airbnb side, we have tried quite diligently to be proactive on this score, and we are now collecting and remitting hotel taxes on behalf of our hosts and guests in a series of markets, including San Francisco, Portland, Washington, D.C., Chicago, San Jose, California, and Amsterdam. We are working to collect and remit similar taxes in France, which is obviously home to Paris, which is our largest market in the world. And we're having productive conversations with a number of other municipalities to implement this same initiative. The numbers on this are still coming in. Thus far, we have already sent $5 million, a combined total of $5 million to San Francisco and Portland in hotel taxes. We know that our guests, when they visit different communities, pay a substantial amount in sales taxes. We know that they are having a substantial positive impact on small businesses that are seeing the benefit of tourism, many in places that have not benefited from tourism in the past. We would desperately like to collect and remit hotel taxes in New York, but there are state and city laws that actually prevent us from doing so. We have gone to leaders at both the state and city level and said, please, let us collect and remit hotel taxes. We estimate that we would contribute an additional $65 million to the city and state of New York. They have not done so yet. We remain hopeful, and we continue to work with them to try and make that happen. So there is substantial progress that is being made on the hotel tax front, and it's good progress. Our community really wants to do more to contribute to the cities that they call home and that they visit. And I think we're taking impressive strides towards that goal. On affordable housing, The overwhelming majority of Airbnb hosts are sharing only the home in which they live, and they're sharing it on an occasional basis. The numbers vary from market to market, but in most places where we've done the analysis, we found that 80 to 90% of Airbnb hosts are sharing only the home in which they live. So they're not taking housing off the market, they're sharing what is their primary residence. In New York, the Attorney General's conclusion was reached with what we believe was old and outdated data. We removed more than 2,000 listings that were offered by folks who weren't providing the type of high quality experience that we think our guests expect and deserve. And we continue to work with folks to help monitor and strengthen our community, both in New York and around the world. And this is actually a very interesting area where we see really a lack of analysis. Most folks who have looked at this and studied it have found that there are far too few Airbnb listings in any given housing market to have an appreciable impact on housing prices. And the fact that most people are sharing their primary residence speaks to that point as well. But it is something that has really been sort of, I think, understudied. And there's not a lot of academic research that has gone into short-term rentals and how they impact housing markets. But we do know that this is actually an economic lifeline for countless people, I suspect both in Washington and I know in other communities around the world. We hear constantly from Airbnb hosts who tell us that sharing their extra bedroom that had been vacated was what they needed to avoid foreclosure or avoid eviction. We hear constantly from people who say that sharing their extra bedroom or sharing their home when they were out of town, say for vacation or for work, generated extra income that helped them get through hard times, make ends meet, or if they weren't having hard times, it helped them pursue their passion and start a business. Some of the first Airbnb hosts in New York now have a business that employs 12 people, and they were only able to start that business because they had the security of knowing that they could make a little bit of extra money by sharing their space on Airbnb, and they could get through tough times. So we really see Airbnb hosting for many people as something that makes housing more affordable and provides an economic lifeline to them.
Nick, I do want, before we get too much further, I want you to explain something so that we're all on the same page.
Sure.
One of the interesting things, of course, in traditional hospitality is that, someone has a lot of capital and goes and builds a building or converts a building into a hotel. For Airbnb, and you don't select who is an Airbnb host. They step forward and select you, right, essentially as a broker. Right? So can you talk about that process? I mean, is it just anyone who can kind of click through and kind of post some photos and the next week host guests, or what is that process of becoming featured on the Airbnb?
Becoming an Airbnb host.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it is a process that we encourage people to do. We encourage people to list their space on Airbnb. We have a range of hospitality and community standards that we ask people to meet. We also ask people to certify that they'll follow all their local rules and regulations before they list their space. But we believe that giving people the opportunity to easily and safely share their space quickly is good for consumers and good for hosts as well, because it gives them the opportunity to welcome guests to their neighborhood and to their home and provides that economic lifeline. Mm-hmm. So I would encourage everyone to check it out and test it and go through the process.
And are there any kind of overarching trends with respect to so from a research perspective, and we just talked about research, are there trends that you can describe for us? Are there certain kinds of properties, or are there certain locations within cities, or certain kinds of, like for instance, traditional tourist markets versus traditional business markets? I mean, are there trends with respect to the kinds of places you can book through Airbnb?
There absolutely are. I mean, I think that the first thing I would say, and I sort of touched on this earlier, is that there is really a diversity of experience. You can find all kinds of different things on Airbnb. We've got castles, we've got houseboats, we have tree houses. I think there's something that looks like a shoe somewhere. I don't really know. There are all kinds of...
Former rectory in DC.
Okay, excellent. So if that's what you're into, great. We have all sorts of interesting things that people can choose. Getting back to the one trend that was sparked in my mind that touches on something we were talking about earlier in this conversation was location. Roughly 3/4 of our listings in the communities that we've studied are outside of what we defined as the traditional hotel zones. Now, obviously, the size and scope of that traditional zone in each city varies. But when we look at it and make some definitions, we find that most of our listings are not in the neighborhood where you'd find a hotel. That's, we would say, very good for cities because it gives people the opportunity to explore different communities. It gives people the opportunity to stay close to friends, to stay close to family. It gives people the opportunity to spend money in local businesses that haven't benefited from tourism in the past. So that sort of diversity of geography is something that is impressive, and I think sort of shows that consumers are very interested in location and that people are very interested in being hospitable. That they want to share their homes. And so let's take New York, for example. There are a lot of people that want to stay in Queens, that want to stay in different parts of Brooklyn, that want to stay in the Bronx. And there are hosts and tremendous New Yorkers in all those communities that want to share their space. That's great.
I would like to ask a question, actually, to go back a few steps.
I just want to warn the audience. I'm going to stand up here in a second with the mic. So gather your questions. I'm going to turn to you in just a second.
So my question is actually an ethical question, and the reason I'm asking this is because I was having lunch with a gentleman this past week, and he is a huge Airbnb fan. Stayed in London a couple of weeks ago in an Airbnb property, and it turned out that that particular entity that he was staying in was a public housing project, and a gentleman who was living off of the government was renting out his 2 bedrooms as Airbnb entities and sleeping on the couch. So this is a one-off instance, obviously, but it does beg a bigger question about ethical boundaries in terms of being able to rent or at least a space.
Sure.
I'm curious from all of your perspectives how, planning and city offices are looking at those types of issues. The Hotel Association would question that. I'm sure there's a if that was found out on your.
I've asked this question before.
Okay, so go for it.
Okay, I'm happy to start. This is an issue that has been raised. It has been raised notably in New York, where rent-stabilized housing rules and regulations are strong and cover a number of different units. What we have said is that we believe there need to be responsible rules for home sharing in these types of rent-stabilized units. And many of these folks who are sharing their space on Airbnb are folks who are in need, who need it most. Who are struggling economically and who are really having trouble getting by and making ends meet. So we think that we need some responsible rules and restrictions on this when it comes to this matter. Those rules and restrictions need to be locally appropriate. I think the one thing that I have learned in my nearly 2 years in this job is that every city is indeed very different. There are different constraints, there are different rules, there are different regulations, and there should be locally appropriate solutions to this issue. In general, prohibition doesn't appear to be the answer, but we definitely support responsible and smart rules and regulations to help govern this practice.
I was thinking, also in conjunction with the question about trends, that I suspect something that may be a gathering trend is as Airbnb has become more popular and more people consider the options of participating from the point of view of the real estate side. I noticed an article recently in DC Urban Turf, making a living off Airbnb, new companies sprout up to manage listings. And so on the one hand, it's a positive in terms of company creation, that people are creating companies that take the burden off of washing the towels and putting the clean linens on, and in some cases it's going so far as to do all the communications with the potential hosts, which means to me that could be, if that becomes more of a trend, then it begins to erode the idea of, which used to be B&Bs in Ireland. You would go because your host would tell you about the hidden things that you wouldn't necessarily know of in the neighborhood, which is, you know, I still see quite a bit of that on Airbnb websites. But it goes back to the, when you were talking about responsible rules and the issue of affordable housing, it strikes me the one responsible rule that would be good for cities to consider is that people who have the opportunity to rent out those rooms, they must live on the premises, even if they're on a business trip or something and not physically there. The Office of Planning went through a big zoning, is still going through a big zoning revision process, but one of the big controversies was over the creation of accessory dwelling units. And the important thing in that instance was we were creating new units to help people pay mortgages or avoid foreclosure, but the owner of the domicile had to reside on the premises. And it strikes me that's a rule that could help mitigate against housing units disappearing from the permanent rental supply, and at the same time still allow people to benefit from renting out the rooms and getting the extra income and being there and providing the greetings and familiarity to the neighborhood.
You raise an excellent point, and we have advocated for rules and regulations in at least two markets, San Francisco and New York, that would permit home sharing only in folks' primary residences, the home in which they live. Communities are different. There are some markets, sort of more traditional vacation markets, that depend on people listing and sharing large numbers of vacation rentals, which is why which gets back to the need for locally appropriate solutions. But you're absolutely right when talking about sort of sharing the home in which you live. We find that those in cities, that's most of who our hosts are, and have advocated for similar policies, particularly in New York and San Francisco. So that certainly makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I would agree with Nick that especially on the idea that this is a very localized debate. I mean, it's tempting to think about a national silver bullet solution because it's such a hot topic in the media. But you know, one market, whether it's Savannah or Raleigh, they look at it from a strictly zoning and neighborhood integrity perspective, and then of course in the bigger metropolitan areas, it's affordable housing, it's the effect on organized labor, it's the you know, any number of other issues. I think it's very interesting, and I would say that, you know, from our perspective, you know, the occasional sharing of a room or a vacation rental, that's something that's been going on for decades, whether it's through Craigslist or the phone book or printed classified ads decades ago. That's been around for a while. I think Airbnb just makes that a lot easier. What we have more concerns with, and I think what a lot of revenue officials and regulators have concerns with, is the way that websites such as Airbnb have allowed the proliferation of illegal hotels, which I think gets into, from our perspective, unfair competition. We would like a more level playing field. If there's a multi-unit apartment building that's rented on a nightly basis, all the units, and there's no host in there, and it's in a business district or a tourist destination, that's in our mind a hotel, and our members, you know, would, if they opened a property of similar size and scale, would have to go through a lot of zoning and regulatory compliance processes and collect and remit taxes. Often those taxes are different than simply sales taxes, which I think that's a debate from city to city as well, is what actual taxes are being collected.
No, I think that's a good point, and we strongly oppose illegal hotels. We find that illegal hotels that use Airbnb provide a low-quality experience to guests, and it's not the type of experience that we are seeking to facilitate. As I think I noted earlier, we removed 2,000 listings from our community in New York because they were providing that low-quality experience, and we want to continue to work with folks in New York and elsewhere to fight illegal hotels. It's not something that we believe can or should be part of the Airbnb community.
That's great. So let's open it up to questions. We've got the first question here. If you just introduce yourself and go ahead, fire away.
Gregg Rockett, I work for Hilton. Doesn't look like
it is. Is the audio? Yes, so we're just using that for recording purposes.
Okay. Question.
Yeah.
I will project. the mainstream hotel companies use their loyalty programs as a means of revenue generation. They tout them as producing premium revenues per client at low acquisition costs, and are somewhat suspicious of third-party channels as being expensive forms of customer acquisition, not necessarily producing loyal guests. What does your type of accommodation do to instill loyalty, and at what cost to the host?
This is kind of like a business model question for Airbnb.
Yeah, and I confess to this being slightly outside of my lane, but I can tell you, so I would be happy to get back to folks later. I can tell you that the biggest thing that we do to facilitate customer loyalty is to provide a unique and interesting experience for guests who can enjoy the diversity of experience and who continue to come back and use the product. And we've seen impressive growth since when the company got started in 2008 to now. So that providing that experience and that diversity is what I think folks have found incredibly powerful, and what really keeps folks coming back.
We have another question up here.
Hello, my name is Ava. I'm actually in the real estate program, but I'm in a hybrid class with the urban planning program. From a real estate aspect, do you ever see like a real estate development trend coming about with the trend of Airbnb, something along the lines of a boutique condominium building where people can buy the condos as an investment, but it's operated by Airbnb, so you buy it as an Airbnb investment and then just rent it out to tourists? Do you think that could ever be a trend in popular cities?
I mean, I don't know that I can speak to that as well. I mean, I think anything can become a trend, and to try to predict the innovation of the lodging industry, much less any industry, would be difficult. But it sounds like something that if you have the idea, someone's probably going to try it.
Another question I have, more geared towards the Airbnb factor. I've never used it before, but I'm looking to use it. How do you trust it? In my mind, like, it's a great option because you get to live like a local for the stay of your vacation. But on the other hand, another person has a set of keys to where you're staying. So on a security level, how do you mitigate that?
So trust is the foundation of our community, and without trust, we would not have grown, and we would not have succeeded. And we are very proud that we have built a trustworthy community where negative experiences are incredibly rare. We have a number of features that help people establish that trust. So you as a guest, when you're choosing a place that you would like to stay, can read reviews from people who have stayed in that place before. And you can only leave a review if you've actually stayed in that listing, so you know that all the reviews are authentic and come from people who have had an experience in that particular listing. You can communicate via our secure messaging profile with your host, so you can get an idea of who that person is, ask questions, and get answers to make sure that you feel comfortable with it. We have features like verified ID that connect your offline identification with your online identity, and really being able to communicate with your hosts. We also have a global trust and safety team that includes 150 people whose sole job is working on trust and safety issues for our community to help ensure that everyone who uses Airbnb, both on the host side and on the guest side, has a safe experience. It's something that we take incredibly seriously. It's something that we are working on constantly. We have a number of technological tools that help us predict and identify and stop problems before they happen. And that is something that we are constantly working to develop. We have consulted with a number of experts, including a wide range of different individuals and organizations who serve as part of our Trust and Safety Advisory Board. It's an important issue for us, and it's something that we continue to focus on, devote a substantial number of resources to. And we also have a 24/7 customer service and trust and safety hotline. So if you were to ever arrive at a listing and say, this feels weird, for whatever reason it may be, you can call our folks and we will help you address the problem or help you get to a place where you feel safe.
Mina?
My name is Mina Marifat. I teach the hybrid course that Ava was speaking about. I teach about global cities and have also taught and know a lot about Washington. My question is about the disruptive aspect of Airbnb and the fact that it is now spread to so many places around the world. How would you say that the Airbnb has transformed certain parts of the world that people didn't know about? And has it actually led to hotels going there as a result of Airbnb, an opposite trend? And so, and thirdly, has there really been, it's only since 2008 that you've been around, has there really been any attempt, do you even really want to know the science behind all this, or you're just riding the wave and enjoying it?
I'll take them in reverse order. We desperately want to know the science. There are a lot of people, again, who are much smarter than me, who spend a lot of time thinking about who our hosts are, who our guests are, how we can make the experience for both hosts and guests better, both online and offline. It's something that we think about a lot. So yes, you're absolutely right about that. On the disruptive nature, I mean, I think that the question about whether or not hotels have gone into other places is a better question for, I think, some of my colleagues on the panel than I. I do think that for us to win, no one has to lose. We strongly believe that we are growing the size of the hospitality pie and making it possible for more people to travel, for more people to go to more new places. And the numbers appear to be bearing that out. If you look at hotel occupancy rates in most places, if you look at hotel revenue, if you look at hotel growth and construction, you see that hotels are doing pretty well. So we think that while it is disruptive in sort of giving people new opportunities and giving people new choices, we think that this is something that we think that this is a rising tide that can lift all boats. And I don't know, you would probably be able to better speak to it.
I don't have any hard data on the reverse trend that you talked about. I think the probably the best illustration of that, and there may be some of those examples, unique examples, that I'm not aware of, but I think the idea that some of these brands are trying to get into smaller format properties that will allow them to get into a smaller community or a smaller popular destination. I think that illustrates that the traditional format hotels or any type of lodging are trying to, as we discussed earlier, meet the customer where they want to go. You're seeing a lot of acquisitions and expansion of brands that have almost a bed and breakfast feel, just slightly bigger, and those are something that you don't have to have 100 rooms or 300 rooms, and it doesn't take as long to get that up and running. One point Nick mentioned that I think does kind of address some of the reasons that maybe we as the traditional regulated lodging industry do look at the growth of Airbnb type properties with some concern, is that right now we are at a tremendously high occupancy rates. I mean, the economy is doing well, and that is directly tied, the lodging occupancy is directly tied to that. No doubt at some point in the next couple of years it will go down, as it always does. And on the down cycle, unfortunately, it takes a lot longer for the construction trends to catch up. So a company may launch construction on a 1,500 room hotel somewhere, and then the bottom drops out of the economy. That is going to affect that property. So I think one of the reasons that we have particular concern with things like illegal hotels is when the economy does eventually have its next downturn, properties in locations where business travelers go will have a tough time competing on price with offerings that don't necessarily have to collect the same amount of taxes and remit the same taxes or meet the same building codes or zoning requirements or health and safety codes and inspections. So I think that'll be a concern for us going forward.
Just
here.
a quick question on that score in terms of the research. Have you all ever just done follow-up surveys of guests, asking them, had this Airbnb accommodation not been available, where would you have stayed would not have taken the trip, as being one of the examples or one of the options?
We have found, and I'm going to get the number wrong, so but it is available at airbnb.com/economic-impact. We found that, I think, and I apologize if I get this wrong, that a significant percent, I want to say 20%, 20 to 30% of folks in the markets that we've studied said that they wouldn't have taken their trip or wouldn't have stayed as long if not for Airbnb. That number varies by market. We've done that analysis in 12 or 13 places. We've done a variety of economic impact analyses that we've talked about on our website and are still doing more in more markets. But it is a question that we have asked. We've found that for a number of people, they have told us that they would have cut their trip short or not taken it if they hadn't had Airbnb.
I've got 4 questions in the crowd. We're going to go into a lightning round here, so let's keep it short and snappy.
Good evening. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. My name is Peter. I'm in the real estate development program and I work for a DC real estate developer. I love Airbnb. I use it all over North America and Europe for my travels, and I rent out my furnished basement on Airbnb and have had many local organic experiences that I don't think would have been possible had I been staying in a traditional hotel. But you said that Airbnb is starting to collect and remit hotel tax?
Yes.
And I just wanted to ask, is Airbnb doing anything to push back against this tax? I mean, it's a 14% tax, I think, in Washington, D.C. that, well, you know, traditional hotels, they have a big environmental impact, cause traffic, you know, use city resources, so the hotel tax is justified. But if I have a buddy staying on my couch versus I have someone who I don't know staying on my couch, you know, if my buddy comes and stays for free, do I have to pay the government 14% of the dinner he bought me? I mean, why do Airbnb, I guess you can help us to understand why Airbnb rentals, why do they have to be required for the hotel tax, and what are you doing to push back against it?
Well, the laws on tax laws as they apply to hotels, and you can certainly speak to this better than I, are incredibly different in every municipality. And in most places, particularly in the United States, the way hotel taxes work is that it is a tax that is paid by the guest, collected by the hotel, and then sent from the hotel to the appropriate local government. And that can get really complicated. So like in New York, and I'm going to get this wrong, there are a couple of city taxes, there are a couple of state fees, and you add them all up, and when you get your bill at a hotel, it's, you know, 4 or 5 different fees, and you as the guest pay them, and the hotel then sends it off to the government. We have found so that's sort of roughly how it works, but it's different in every different community because communities make rules that work for them when it comes to this matter. We have found that most of our hosts, when confronted with this issue and learn about this issue, want to make sure that they are contributing and that they are following these rules, but these rules were not set up for people like you who are just renting their spare bedroom or their couch or whatever it may be. They were set up for hotels and organizations that have teams of lawyers and accountants and have really confusing processes and did not contemplate the idea of someone sharing their spare bedroom. But we have also found that many hosts want to make sure that they are following the rules, and collecting and remitting those taxes is one way that we can help ensure that they are contributing, that they are following those rules, and it's easier for everyone. It's easier for the host. It doesn't affect your payout as a host. It doesn't affect the amount of money that you collect. It's easy for the guest. It is a fee that is added into your transaction. There's no separate transaction. And it's also easy for the government, who gets a check from us on a monthly or quarterly basis. I think when we remit varies in different places. But we have found that most people have been grateful for us stepping in to try and fix this. And look, we're having, first off, it's important for us to hear from hosts like you, your views on this matter. We've heard from lots. And we have generally found that people have been grateful we've been taking this action, but we're having lots of different conversations with different governments in different places. And I think that the issue of taxes is something that always comes up, that will continue to come up, and we're going to keep working on locally appropriate solutions that help hosts meet their obligations and move this this activity forward.
I would just add that as Nick alluded to, that in that layers of taxes that a guest at a hotel receives, one of those layers is usually something that helps provide for the infrastructure, such as the roads and the metro that no doubt your guests use to get to your house, or for marketing that destination for them to want to come to the city in the first place. And so there are certain taxes that I think do have a broader benefit than simply those that choose to stay at a traditional hotel. Now, picking that line and how you distinguish that is definitely a local debate, and we think that's how it's going to play out.
Yeah, that's great.
My name is Mike Bush. I teach retail development in our master's program. I have stayed in VRBO places for many years. What would influence me to use Airbnb instead of VRBO?
And,
check it out. See what you like. VRBO, and I make a habit of not commenting on other companies, and I think that I will continue to stick to that. But I would say that we offer, as I've said before, a number of thousands, a million different listings around the world that provide some incredible experiences. I don't know where you're traveling to or what you're looking to do, but next time you're trying to book a trip, give us 5 minutes of your time, see what you like.
Okay, question up here.
Hi, Calvin Gladney, Mosaic Urban Partners. We're a real estate development and consulting firm. I guess I also teach real estate entrepreneurship in the real estate program here. And then finally, I guess I'll be doing a panel on Detroit in a couple of weeks, so you all should come back. My question is about disruption. And when you look at Zillow, Amazon, Uber, all of those disruptive technologies have caused an upgrade in the customer service profile of the industry with which it's in. So taxis are trying to be better because Uber provides a better experience, on and on and on. How do you see Airbnb doing that for the hotel industry?
I think that's probably a better question for the hotel industry. I would say that we encourage hosts to provide guests with a local and unique and pleasant experience. We try and give them the tools that they need and the resources that they need to do just that. And if that encourages everyone in travel and tourism to be more hospitable, then that's great. I think that there are probably a lot of, I know for a fact there are a lot of hotels that already provide incredible hospitality experiences to their guests. And we try and learn from everyone in travel and tourism about those experiences. But I wouldn't want to comment on other industries, I don't think.
Take the bait.
Nope. Not doing it.
I would just,
nice try.
I would just say, I agree with kind of the general concept that a lot of new technologies, especially with respect to Uber, have forced a new level of competition and innovation that may not have been there before. I don't agree that there was a lack of innovation and competition in the lodging industry before. I think that our members and the entire industry compete on a daily basis to improve the customer experience and compete through marketing and through whatever they can through the means under which they operate to improve the customer experience and compete with each other. I think that is a key distinction between the taxi and Uber debate. As a longtime resident of this city, I can certainly say that I was glad for the arrival of Uber myself. But I think, as I mentioned earlier, that we compete and market against each other as much as we can under the rules by which we have to play.
So last audience question, and then Gregg, you can close it down.
I want to get back to the question of disruption. Oh, sorry, Robin Snyder. I want to get back to the question of disruption, and I think from my perspective, there's been a little bit too much emphasis in this discussion on the customer or the host. What about the community and at the micro scale, the neighbor? So we've heard from Airbnb, and it sounds like you guys, set a high bar. You've got the taxes and people participating in your service are living in the home and occasionally renting out some space. My experience is living next door to a property that is vacant most of the year, except for the great times of year when people want to be on the Southwest waterfront. And then week after week after week, we have different families coming in, spending a week. And we also have, kids renting it for a weekend and having incredible parties. I can tell you about numbers of times we've had to call the police. So this is a group of 6 row houses, Southwest waterfront, O Street, Southwest. 2 of them are owned by a guy that lives in Bethesda, Maryland, and puts them on HomeAway.com. And so he's getting rich. He's getting a lot of money. What about the other 4 homeowners in that row? And then the follow-up to that is that on the second row of 6 townhouses that are further back from the water, one went up for sale a couple of months ago. A friend of mine bidded on it, was outbidded, okay, lost the home, was bought by an investor. Guess what? They listed it on Zillow 2 days after their closing. So now we're seeing a deterioration in that group of 6 townhouses where DC residents should be living. I mean, the reason I moved to this group was because I wanted that tight-knit sense of community that Southwest waterfront actually already has. So what about the realities of, it's not all Airbnb. I mean, maybe you guys set a really high bar. What about the disruptive, it's not just one company and their standards, it's the spin-offs. And what do we have to protect the rest of the community from the disruption and the deterioration of community cohesiveness? Because that's what we're experiencing.
Ellen, do you want to take that?
Well, depending on the zoning of your site, if it's a residential zone and someone is using it for commercial purposes, you do have recourse. You call the zoning administrator's office or Department of Consumer Regulatory Affairs and ask for an inspection. Let's see, DC did just do an agreement with respect to hotel taxes?
Yes. We are collecting and remitting as of February 15th.
So if it's a commercial zone that permits residential and commercial, which there's not much of in Southwest, so probably it is a residential zone. But if it's not a zoning violation, then at least you have the recourse of checking with the Chief Financial Officer's office or Destination DC to see if hotel taxes are being remitted for that.
That's great. Very good. So one last question I have, just to kind of summarize a little bit about what we've talked about this evening, is kind of a basic question, but it also looks toward the future. And I want each of you to address it. And I don't think that there is necessarily an answer for this, but it kind of goes really broad. And I ask the question, well, what is hospitality at the end of the day? Because it seems to me that Airbnb is an entity of hospitality, and it is a lodging entity of sorts. At the same time, the American Hotel and Lodging Association is that, a lodging association. Is Airbnb not a lodging entity in and of itself that happens to hybridize with other parts of residential life? And at some point in the future, do we see all of these things kind of coming under the greater umbrella of hospitality in general, lodging? What do you see in the future? Will you ever be working together rather than opposing one another?
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, that I think if we were all kind of under the same regulatory scheme, there would be a lot more willingness for for our members and even those lodging operations that aren't part of our membership to embrace some of the newer technologies, newer web-based booking services. It's a somewhat similar situation with online travel companies like Expedia or Priceline. They certainly do a good job of filling rooms, and they play by a set of rules that govern them. And I think we've seen, I spoke a couple of months ago at the National Association that represents bed and breakfast operators, and half the room, I mean, they wanted to talk about the so-called threat of Airbnb, but when the moderator asked a question, half the room actually used it to market their own properties. They wanted to meet the customer where they were. And what they were choosing to do is to somehow proactively in their listings say that they were a regulated commercial lodging operation, and in the hopes that that would provide an upsell on what they're offering. And I mean, I think that at some point that it could get to that way if Airbnb and your competitors became another distribution channel, then it would be part of the overall hospitality lodging world.
I was just struck when I was thinking about this panel that in one way the amount of publicity directed at Airbnb makes it seem like such a new thing, but for, in my youth traveling in Ireland, using Arthur Frommer's Ireland on $10 a day, there was the Irish government having very accommodatingly certified a number of B&Bs around the country, and I could enjoy the hospitality and also know that it had been inspected. And so I think about bed and breakfasts, pensions, hostels. There already are such a wide variety of hospitality experiences that Airbnb has taken much like Uber, it took advantage of technology. But it does seem like understanding this all as a broad panoply and figuring out if there are problems, or by doing some research and better understanding what the implications are, it'd be better, as the taxi industry did in DC with the Taxi Cab Commission, than developing an app that allows you to see your taxi coming to pick you up. Clearly, one of the great things about Uber that had been lacking before. So I think it gives us opportunities to figure out what are the individual problems and come up with them, rather than saying, oh, this is a bad idea and we just shouldn't do it.
I would say two things. I think there is less acrimony and conflict here than some would believe. We have a lot of very productive, positive, constructive conversations with folks in what would be considered the traditional hospitality and lodging world, who are interested in what we do and we're interested in what they do. And they are not, no one is spitting at one another across the table. It's really quite civil and productive and positive. So I think that there is substantial room for folks to work together. I think that you're seeing that in a lot of markets around the world where we have made impressive regulatory progress by bringing everyone to the table and working together on a variety of these types of questions. I think that the places where the fights are biggest get the most attention because fights are more interesting, but that is sort of the nature of the beast. So I think that there is tremendous room for the various individuals and organizations that are represented in this room to work together, and I think that's what's going to happen in the years ahead. On the question of sort of traditional lodging, as you would never classify Airbnb as traditional lodging because we don't own the properties. So I don't know if you sort of want to stick to that definition, then the answer is probably not. But on the question of what is hospitality, I mean, look, at the end of the day, hospitality is what makes you smile. Hospitality is doing something nice for someone. Hospitality is giving someone a good experience. And the reality is that lots of people can do that, and that can happen in a formal setting, in a formal hotel, and that can happen by someone who very nicely and kindly opens their extra room in their basement to a traveler. facilitating those kinds of experiences and giving people more opportunity to provide that kind of hospitality has, I think, a lot of economic benefits. I also think it has a lot of social benefits. I think it has the power to connect people from different communities and cultures and continents who otherwise would not have met each other, and exposing them to one another. And I think that there is a difficult to quantify but incredibly important benefit to that kind of hospitality, and we're glad that we can facilitate it.
Clearly a conversation to be continued.
Yeah.
I want to take the opportunity to thank everybody here for joining us. And I also wanted to thank Gregg Rockett from Hilton, who helped us put together a lot of the questions and facilitate the construction of this panel. So I'll let Uwe conclude, and don't forget, please join us upstairs. You have the opportunity to talk to all of us one-on-one in the reception upstairs.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank everyone. This is just, I've been really provoked by this conversation. I know there are a lot of students in the room who are actively working on this in their research, and it seems like a very fruitful conversation that, and I love, of course, this tagline of these problems being solved locally, because it is local communities that are really going to have to sort this out. And so that's what we're here to do at the Georgetown Urban Regional Planning Program. Please join me.
Long city council meeting.